Tomorrow, your grandma is out of this house. My father's voice sliced through the Thanksgiving dinner like a cold blade. Grandma's trembling hands flew to her face, muffling a sob that seemed to echo louder than the clinking silverware and the muffled laughter that had filled the room just seconds before. Every fork froze mid-air. Every eye in that dining room locked on us. My mother's mouth fell open, my cousin sat paralyzed, and even the turkey seemed untouched by the sudden silence. My father raised his glass of wine, as if he'd just made an ordinary toast. But it wasn't ordinary. It was war. I had been a police officer for barely 3 years, still young enough for some relatives to think of me as just a kid, yet old enough to know the smell of injustice when it filled the air. And that night, the air inside our house smelled heavy, like betrayal mixed with roasted turkey. Grandma sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, the matriarch of this family. Her shoulders curled inward, as if she could make herself smaller. She was 78 years old, skin lined with decades of hard work and sacrifice, but still sharp-eyed and fiercely proud. For her to cry openly in front of everyone told me the blow had landed deep. She wasn't just humiliated, she was broken. I looked at my father, tall, broad-shouldered, graying at the temples, but still radiating the arrogance that had carried him all his life. His face wore that smug expression I knew too well, the one that meant I have control, and nobody here can challenge me. He thought this was his moment of power. "Dad," I said slowly, my voice steady even though my heart hammered against my ribs. "What did you just say?" "You heard me." His words came out like bullets, short and sharp. "She's leaving tomorrow. This is my house, not a retirement home. I won't have her dragging us down any longer." Gasps circled the table. My younger brother dropped his fork. It clattered against his plate like a gunshot. My aunt put a hand to her chest. Nobody moved to defend Grandma. Fear, or maybe years of silence, kept them frozen. I watched my father savor the silence he had created, sipping from his glass with deliberate calm. And in that moment, my training as a cop, patience, observation, control, kicked in. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. Instead, I reached for my purse, tucked beneath the chair. I smiled. Just a small, deliberate smile. "Thanks for the heads up," I said. Every pair of eyes swung to me. My father's grin faltered for half a second, then returned. He thought I was bluffing. He always thought he could outwit me, that I was still the little girl who used to hide in her room when his temper flared. But this time, I wasn't a little girl. I was an officer. I was a granddaughter. And I had been waiting for this very moment. I pulled out a white envelope, thick with folded documents. The sound of paper brushing against paper seemed loud in the stillness. I walked the length of the table, each step echoing like a drumbeat in my ears. My father's eyes narrowed as I set the envelope neatly beside his plate, right next to the carving knife. "What's this supposed to be?" he asked, his voice edged with irritation, but underneath, I caught the first crack of unease. "Just something for you to look at later," I said evenly. My voice didn't waver. If anything, it felt steadier than it ever had. The tension in the room grew thick, suffocating. Nobody picked up their fork. Nobody touched the cranberry sauce or the mashed potatoes cooling on their plates. Every relative was caught between hunger and horror, unsure if they were witnessing a family spat or the beginning of something much darker. I turned to Grandma, her tear-streaked face lifted toward me, confusion mingled with hope in her tired eyes. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "Come on, Grandma. Let's get some air," I whispered. She nodded, shaky but willing. She trusted me. She had always trusted me. I stood tall, smoothing the front of my navy blue dress, and looked at everyone seated around the table. "Please enjoy your dinner," I said softly, my words calm but carrying an unspoken weight. "Have a wonderful evening." And with that, I guided Grandma out of her chair. The scrape of her chair legs against the hardwood floor sounded final, like the closing of a chapter. We walked toward the double doors at the end of the dining room. My father's glare burned into my back, but he stayed seated, too proud or too certain of his control to follow. The moment the door swung shut behind us, whispers erupted inside. Shock, disbelief, speculation. Let them whisper. They had no idea what was about to happen. Outside in the hallway, the air was cooler, freer. Grandma clutched my hand tightly, her tears still falling. "What are you doing, child?" she asked, voice trembling. "Taking care of you, Grandma," I said firmly, "like you always took care of us." As I walked her toward the coat rack, my pulse slowed, my breathing steadied. Everything was unfolding exactly as I had planned, because the envelope I'd placed on my father's plate wasn't just paper. It was a fuse, and the explosion it would ignite would shake this family to its core. And I was ready for it. The hallway smelled like cinnamon and wet wool. Coats hung heavy on brass hooks, damp from the drizzle. I helped Grandma into her brown cardigan, the one with the frayed cuff she refused to fix. Her skin was cool, but her grip was firm. "You didn't have to stand up to him," she whispered. "I did," I said. "For you. For me." A brittle laugh leaked from the dining room, a clink of silverware, then silence again, charged like air after lightning. I wrapped her scarf and breathed in ivory soap, a touch of Pond's, peppermint from her purse. The knit scratched my knuckles, and memory opened like a cedar chest. When I was 6, gospel hummed from the radio while she stirred chili in a dented pot. Steam fogged the window until the oaks looked painted on. "We don't waste onions or kindness," she'd say, her knife moving steady and exact. She stretched a pound of beef and a dime into supper for 6. Money never beat her math. Dad, 23, already restless, rolled his eyes. "Ma, turn off that funeral music." He snagged an apple, kissed her cheek without looking. "I'm getting you out of this shack," he said. Promise or threat? Even then, I wasn't sure. When I was 9, winter bit the inside of your nose. She walked me to the bus stop in boots 2 sizes too big so I could have the good ones. "I'll be fine," she said. "I grew up on drafts and thin porches." A thermos of cocoa so sweet it left grit at the bottom warmed my hands. That's how I learned the miracle of something given from almost nothing. When I was 12, Dad won his first big contract. We moved into a house with granite counters that didn't know our names. Grandma carried a casserole in a chipped Pyrex and asked where to set it. Dad looked past her to the realtor and the neighbor with a perfect lawn. Her smile sagged at the edges. She slept on the sofa to give the kids the good rooms, then rose at dawn to scrub the sink and call it blessing, not work. She never missed a shift at the diner on Maple and 3rd, refilling coffee for truckers and teachers, wiping the counter in careful circles. Tips were folded gratitude. She tucked them into a cookie tin with a one-eyed Santa. From that tin came sneakers, trumpet lessons, dentist bills Dad forgot he'd promised. She kept the ledger in her head, what went out, what came in, what was owed, and what was given freely. After Dad made partner, he stopped visiting the diner. "It's not my scene," he said. When Granddad died, hands like sandpaper, pockets like lint, she wore black a week, then pulled the car title from the desk and paid the tax bill no one remembered. "Paper is how men speak power," she told me, tapping the envelope. She showed me the hiding place for the important ones, the deed to a tiny lake cabin, an insurance policy that looked small until you read the fine print, receipts bound with elastic and faith. Dad called it hoarding. "Ma, you keep junk," he said, sifting pie tins and rubber bands. He believed money could replace memory. Comfort could erase history. He forgot how fast comfort burns. Voices pressed against the dining room door. Rain braided down the front glass. Streetlights wobbling like coins at the bottom of a fountain. My chest ached where my badge usually pinned. I mapped exits, faces, the chances of escalation. In my head, I listed relatives like witnesses. The cousin who sides with whoever pours his drink. The aunt who collects secrets. My mother who will beg for peace even when peace costs the truth. "He doesn't mean it," Grandma murmured. He says storm things. They blow over. He put the boat in the water, I said. Launched is launched. Her palm trembled in mine. He's my boy, she added. Another Thanksgiving surfaced. Me at 15, rinsing dishes while football laughter shook the walls. Dad called her stuffing old-fashioned. Grandma smiled without teeth. If a thing feeds you, she said, leave it the way it is. Later, she wrapped leftovers for the neighbor whose hours got cut. Dad frowned at the foil like generosity was a leak. I used to mistake her gentleness for weakness. Now I knew it was strategy. People underestimate those who don't shout. They forget how quiet builds. On Academy graduation day, she pressed a St. Michael medal into my palm and a folded note listing where she kept documents no one else remembered existed. She trusted me with paper. She trusted me with herself. Behind the door, my father's voice rose, sharp, then uncertain. Pride might make him wait. Curiosity would make him open the envelope. My pulse ticked like a metronome set too fast. Child, Grandma said, what did you put in there? Protection, I said. And memory. I held her gaze. And truth that doesn't change when someone yells at it. A tired laugh fluttered out of her. You're your mother's iron and your daddy's fire, she said. Take care you don't burn. I'm aiming for light. Light shows where the dirt is, she said, mischief returning for a breath. A chair shrieked across hardwood. A cousin hissed, Don't! Another voice, Let him. There was the delicate tear of paper. Then a hush like a room holding its breath. I pictured my father's face, the mask loosening, the calculation scrambling, the first lick of panic when the math no longer works. I stood, smoothing my dress out of habit, learned from watching Grandma make herself proper for people who didn't deserve her best. She rose with me, steady on my arm. Ready? I asked. As I'll ever be, she said. I drew one more breath of cinnamon and old wool, watched rain stitch the street outside, and set my hand on the door. From the other side came a sound I'd heard only once. The night we told him his father was gone. Not a cry. Not yet. The sound a man makes when the rope he trusted gives way. Paper slid, a flap folded back. And then the scream began. The scream rattled through the oak-paneled doors, sharp and guttural, like something torn out of an animal. It silenced the whispers at the table. For a heartbeat, even the storm outside seemed to hold its breath. Then came the scrape of wood as my father's chair toppled over. A wine glass shattered. Gasps scattered around the dining room like firecrackers. I opened the door. The smell of roasted turkey and spiced yams hit me first. Comforting scent soured by tension, so thick you could almost chew it. My father stood at the head of the table, the envelope crumpled in his fist, documents spilling like pale confetti. His face, usually a mask of control, was ashen. Sweat beaded at his temple. He looked less like a patriarch and more like a man cornered by his own reflection. What did you do? His voice cracked, the timbre of command fractured. Where did you get this? Everyone's eyes ping-ponged between us. My mother's hand hovered near her lips. Cousins sat stiff as pews in church, afraid to breathe. Grandma stayed behind me, clutching my arm with surprising strength, her presence a quiet anchor. I stepped forward. My heels clicked on the hardwood floor, each sound deliberate. I kept my hands at my sides, open, calm. In my job, escalation meant disaster. Tonight, escalation meant truth. I didn't do anything, Dad, I said, steady as a cop at roll call. I simply collected what you hoped no one would notice. He shook the envelope. These deeds, these signatures, this isn't right. This can't be legal. Everything in that envelope is legal, I replied. The original property deed, the inheritance papers Grandpa left when he passed. Grandma's name isn't just written there for show. It's binding. This house is half hers. Always has been. A ripple moved through the room. Shock, disbelief, then dawning understanding. My brother exhaled audibly, like a weight had rolled off his chest. Aunt Linda whispered, "I knew it," under her breath. My father's gaze darted to his sister. "Don't you start, Linda." His voice rose, brittle. "This is my house. I paid the mortgage. I built this life." "With her name on the deed," I cut in. "And with her tips from the diner paying the tax bills when you were between jobs. With her savings covering braces for me and Michael when insurance didn't. Don't act like you carried this family alone." His hand trembled around the papers. He slapped them against the table, hard enough to make the gravy boat wobble. "You don't understand." "No," I interrupted, my voice ringing sharper now. "You don't understand. You tried to erase the woman who raised you, who held this family together when you were too proud to admit you needed her. And you did it in front of your children, your grandchildren, at the table she set every Thanksgiving for 40 years. Grandma's breath hitched. I glanced at her, saw tears glisten, but her chin held high. For the first time all night, she wasn't shrinking. She was watching. My father jabbed a finger at me. "You've been snooping, digging through private records? That's illegal." The badge in my wallet pulsed like a second heartbeat. I didn't flash it. Not yet. "It's not illegal when it's public record," I said. "County clerk's office doesn't lie, and you'd know that if you cared enough to look." Silence pressed again, broken only by the tick of Grandma's old wall clock. Tick, 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 the sound of time running out. Mom finally spoke, her voice small. "Is this true, Robert? Did you know her name was still on everything?" His jaw worked. A vein throbbed at his neck. I thought it didn't matter. That paper was just formality." "Formality?" I repeated. "That formality kept this roof over our heads when your business tanked in '09. That formality means you don't get to throw her out like yesterday's trash." The words sliced the air. I could feel my cousins shift, shoulders straightening, spines unbending. They were remembering who cooked for them, who patched their skinned knees, who sang them lullabies when their parents worked late. Not him. Her. Grandma squeezed my arm. "Enough, child," she whispered. But her eyes betrayed a spark of pride. For once, someone was saying what she'd buried for decades. Dad looked around the table. No allies, no nods, just faces turned toward him with a mixture of pity and disgust. His authority, once absolute here, was dissolving faster than sugar in tea. "I won't be humiliated like this," he barked, but the bark rang hollow. "I won't have my own daughter." "You already humiliated yourself," I said, sharper now, every syllable clear. "The moment you stood at this table and tried to exile the woman who made you who you are. You thought you could control the story, but truth has a way of showing up uninvited." Thunder rumbled outside, low and long, like punctuation. Dad's hand faltered, and the envelope slipped from his grasp. Papers scattered across the table. Deed copies, notarized signatures. Evidence of what he'd buried in denial. Cousins craned their necks, eyes widening at black ink that told stories truer than words. He collapsed into his chair, shoulders slumped, wine stains spreading on his shirt like a wound. His breath came ragged. The once proud patriarch looked small, cornered. The scream had drained into silence. I stayed standing, my voice softened, but the steel remained. "This house isn't just yours, Dad. It never was. It's hers too. And she's not going anywhere." The words hung there, heavy but freeing, like doors opening to let air back in. Grandma's hand slipped into mine, warm now, steady. I felt her straighten beside me. For the first time in years, she wasn't apologizing for existing. She was claiming space. Around us, the family exhaled. Relief, release. Thanksgiving dinner would never be the same. But maybe that wasn't a bad thing. The fuse was lit, and the explosion had only just begun. I've learned in law enforcement that victories aren't born the night the sirens blare. They're built in silence, in the unnoticed hours when no one's looking. Tonight felt no different. My father thought I'd blindsided him. The truth was, this confrontation had been 6 months in the making. It started with whispers. Grandma sitting at the kitchen table one morning, her hands folded neatly, her voice too calm. "Your father's been asking questions about my will," she'd said. "Strange questions. About the deed. About the house. I told him nothing, but it unsettled me." I filed it away like a note in a case log. At first, I wanted to believe he was just curious. But I knew my father. Curiosity was never innocent with him. It was hunger disguised as interest. So I did what police training had drilled into me. I observed. I waited. I noticed him rifling through drawers when he thought no one was watching. I saw him checking the mail first, slipping thick envelopes into his briefcase. And then, the night I overheard his voice from the study, low and sharp. "She'll be gone soon. It's time." That's when I knew it wasn't curiosity. It was a plan. I started quietly. First, I visited the county clerk's office on a lunch break. Old buildings smell like paper and dust, and this one was no exception. Fluorescent lights flickered, illuminating row after row of steel filing cabinets. The clerk, a woman with glasses that magnified her tired eyes, pointed me toward the property records. I traced my fingers across manila folders until I found the one that mattered. Our family home. There it was, Grandma's name, printed neatly beside Dad's, joint ownership, recorded in ink long before I was born. My chest tightened. That simple piece of paper meant my father's threats were built on air. I made copies. Not 1, but 3. I tucked them away like insurance policies. 1 in my locker at the precinct, 1 in my safe at home, and 1 in a sealed envelope. The very one I'd placed on the Thanksgiving table. But evidence of ownership wasn't enough. I knew my father's habits. Deny, twist, charm, bully. If I wanted to win, I needed a wall of proof too high for him to climb. So I dug deeper. Bank records told their own story. Grandma had been quietly depositing money from her diner job into a joint account for decades, covering gaps my father pretended never existed. Receipts surfaced. School supplies, medical bills, even the down payment for the car Dad drove proudly around town. All signed by her, all forgotten by him. Late at night, I sat at my desk with a lamp casting a yellow cone of light, organizing everything into neat stacks. Deeds, receipts, affidavits from neighbors who remembered Grandma covering for him. A ledger of sacrifices written in ink and paper instead of memory. Sometimes, as I shuffled the papers, I would pause and hear her voice. "We don't waste onions or kindness." She had given everything quietly, without keeping score. But keeping score had fallen to me now. I even rehearsed the moment, in the mirror, in my head, on long drives back from late-night shifts. How to stand, how to speak. Calm, deliberate, no yelling. Because nothing disarms a tyrant faster than calm truth. Anger feeds them. Calm starves them. There were moments I almost faltered. Mom once caught me staring too long at an old photo of Grandma holding me as a baby, flour on her apron. "You okay, sweetheart?" she asked. I almost told her everything. But I bit it back. If Dad caught wind of my plan, he'd bury deeper, cover tracks. I needed him blind. The week before Thanksgiving, I sat with Grandma in her tiny room at the back of the house. She showed me a shoebox full of keepsakes, faded birthday cards, buttons from the diner uniform, the St. Michael medal she later gave me. Underneath it all was a folded, yellowing letter, Grandpa's handwriting. "My dearest, this house is as much yours as mine. Promise me you'll never let anyone push you out of it." She looked at me with tired eyes. "He won't listen to me anymore," she said. He doesn't have to," I whispered. "He'll listen to the truth." Thanksgiving Day came with rain tapping windows like restless fingers. I slipped the envelope into my purse before heading downstairs, its weight both heavy and reassuring. Dinner unfolded with the usual chaos. Kids running, dishes clattering, laughter mixing with football commentary. And then, just as pie was being sliced, my father made his announcement. I hadn't expected him to do it so publicly, but in hindsight, maybe I should have. Humiliation was his favorite weapon. He thought shame would silence us. He didn't realize shame works both ways. Back at the table, his scream still vibrated through the floorboards, my pulse steady as I watched him crumple under evidence he couldn't twist away. Every detail, every scrap of paper had been building to this. It wasn't just chance that the truth came out tonight. It was design. It was preparation. And yet, as I stood there, I realized something deeper. This wasn't only about law or property. It was about memory, about ensuring Grandma's sacrifices weren't erased by a man too proud to acknowledge them. She had cooked, cleaned, worked, and loved in silence for decades. Now, the silence ended. My father slammed his palm on the table, shoving the papers aside. His voice shook. "You think you've beaten me with scraps of paper? This house is mine, mine!" I looked at him, calm as I'd practiced, and said the words I'd been waiting to release. "No, Dad, this house belongs to the woman who built it, while you were too busy pretending to be its king." The room held its breath. Grandma straightened her shoulders. For the first time, I saw her not as fragile, but as unbreakable. The evidence was only paper, but the truth it carried was steel. And steel, once revealed, doesn't bend. The dining room had become a courtroom, though no judge wore a robe and no jury sat in neat rows. Instead, the jury was our family, stiff-backed in their chairs, forks idle, plates cooling, each one trying to decide where to plant their loyalty. The turkey sat untouched, its skin gone dull, a centerpiece for chaos. Dad's hand shook as he gathered the papers again, but his voice tried to crawl back to authority. "This means nothing," he barked. "These documents are old, outdated. I pay the bills here. I keep the lights on. Everyone knows that." "Everyone knows who saved the lights when you couldn't," I answered quietly. My calm tone was a match against his fury. Calm exposes rage for what it is. Fear. Aunt Linda leaned forward, her bracelets clinking. "Robert, is it true? Did you really try to push Ma out?" Her voice was half outrage, half heartbreak. She had lived under the same roof once, felt the same warmth of Grandma's meals, the same steady hand on her fevered forehead as a child. Dad glared at her. "Don't you take her side, Linda. You always resented me." "This isn't about me," she snapped. "This is about you forgetting where you came from." Mom shifted uncomfortably, twisting her napkin. "Please, can we not fight tonight? It's Thanksgiving. We should—" "No, Mom," I interrupted gently but firmly. "We can't sweep this under mashed potatoes and gravy. Not this time." My younger brother, Michael, pushed back from the table. His chair screeched against the floor. "Dad, you've been lying. For years." His voice trembled, not from fear, but from fury long suppressed. "I worked double shifts last summer to help cover Grandma's prescriptions because you said money was tight. All the while, she had already paid those bills herself. You made me believe she was a burden." Dad's face tightened. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under." "I understand enough," Michael shot back. "I understand you let pride matter more than people." The words cracked through the room, heavier than any thunder. My cousins shifted, exchanging looks. One of them muttered, "Grandma bought my soccer cleats when Dad couldn't." Another added softly, "She paid my camp fee too." Voices rose like an avalanche, piece by piece, all roads leading back to the woman who sat trembling behind me. Grandma covered her mouth, tears spilling freely, not from weakness, but from the shock of hearing her quiet sacrifices spoken aloud for the first time. The ledger she had kept silently was finally being read out loud, every line accounted for. Dad slammed his fist against the table. The silverware jumped. "You're all ungrateful. I built this family. Me." "No," I said, stepping closer, my shadow stretching long across the tablecloth. "She built it. You just lived in the house she kept standing?" Gasps circled. Dad's fury sputtered, sparks without flame. His allies were vanishing. He scanned the table, searching for someone, anyone, to nod, to back him up. No one did. Even Mom, her napkin twisted into a rope, couldn't look him in the eye. He pointed at Grandma, his fingers shaking. "She's turned you all against me." "No," Grandma whispered, her voice fragile but resolute. She lowered her hand from her mouth and spoke into the thick air. "I stayed quiet for too long. Maybe I thought love meant silence. Maybe I thought sons don't turn against mothers. But you turned first, Robert. You forgot who rocked you to sleep, who scrubbed floors so you could go to college. You forgot, but I didn't." Her words didn't roar, but they didn't need to. They landed heavier than any scream. For the first time, Dad's posture faltered. His shoulders slumped, his mouth opened and closed without sound. The man who thought control was his birthright stood stripped, naked in truth. Cousin Drew muttered, "Guess the king just lost his crown." Nervous chuckles bubbled, not mocking, but releasing tension that had pressed too long. Laughter, even uneasy, was a verdict forming. I turned back to Dad. "This house isn't your throne. It's her home, and she's not leaving." Thunder cracked again outside, rain streaking the windows like ink. The storm had found its chorus. Inside, silence followed. Then the clatter of a dropped fork. Slowly, relatives began shifting their chairs closer to Grandma. A hand on her shoulder here, a murmured, "We love you," there. The table, once his kingdom, was shifting into hers. Dad's breath came ragged. His eyes darted, wild. He wasn't a ruler anymore. He was a man watching his fortress crumble, stone by stone, with nothing left to hold. And for the first time in my life, I saw fear in my father's eyes. My father's fear didn't show itself in tears or apologies. It came out as rage, wild and flailing, like a man drowning in a river who claws at anyone within reach. He grabbed the crumpled envelope again, scattering more papers across the table. They fluttered down into gravy, into cranberry sauce, like fallen leaves. "This is lies," he bellowed, face red, spit flying. "She manipulated you, all of you. You think she's some kind of saint? She's weak. She's always been weak." The words cracked across the room like a whip. Gasps erupted. Grandma shrank back, her shoulders hunching, but her hands stayed locked in mine. My jaw tightened. Years of training taught me not to react to provocation. But tonight, it wasn't my badge speaking. It was blood. "You don't get to call her weak," I said, my voice even, cutting through his noise like a blade. "Not after everything she's done to carry this family. Weak is lying. Weak is stealing. Weak is standing on the shoulders of someone stronger and pretending you climbed the mountain yourself." He lunged toward me, fingers stabbing the air. "You watch your mouth. I am your father." I didn't flinch. "And she is your mother, which makes what you're doing unforgivable." The silence that followed was suffocating. Rain rattled the windows. Somewhere, a child sniffled before being hushed quickly. Dad turned to the others, desperation bleeding through his fury. "Don't listen to her. She's been brainwashed. She thinks she's tough because she wears a badge, but she doesn't know what it takes to run a household, to pay bills, to keep food on the table." "Food Grandma cooked," my cousin interjected sharply. "Bills Grandma paid when you gambled half your paycheck." Another voice rose. "She gave me money for textbooks when my parents couldn't. She sat with me in the hospital when no one else came." The voices overlapped, building, a tide too strong for him to outshout. One by one, the family he thought was his army revealed itself as hers. His face twisted, trapped between fury and panic. He slammed his palm on the table, rattling plates. "Stop! Stop! You think you know everything, but you don't. She's hiding things too. She... His words stumbled, collapsed under their own weight. "What is she hiding?" I asked, cold, steady. He opened his mouth, but no sound came. For the first time, I realized he had nothing. No evidence, no paper trail, no truth. Just bluster and smoke. The storm outside groaned. Inside, his authority collapsed like wet cardboard. Mom's voice trembled from the far end of the table. "Robert, enough, please." He spun on her. Betrayed. "You too? After everything I've given you?" "You didn't give us," she whispered, twisting her napkin into threads. "She did." Her eyes flicked to Grandma. "She always did." It was a quiet mutiny, one sentence, and the last thread of his control snapped. He staggered back, knocking into his chair. His hands shook, scattering papers. Among them slid the deed copy. Ink sharp, names undeniable. He stared at it like it was a snake ready to bite. This house is mine," he muttered, less to us than to himself, like repeating the lie could make it true. His shoulders sagged, eyes unfocused. I leaned forward, my voice lowered, steady, deliberate. "No, Dad, it never was yours alone. And now, everyone here knows it." The words landed like a gavel, final, unmistakable. He sank into his chair, eyes darting, lips pressed thin. The man who had strutted at the head of the table minutes before now looked small, cornered, diminished. His scream had started the unraveling. The truth had finished it. Grandma's hand squeezed mine again, firmer this time. I turned to see her chin lifted, tears still streaking her cheeks, but her gaze fierce. She wasn't shrinking anymore. She was rising. And as I looked around at the faces, cousins, aunts, even my brother Michael standing tall, I realized the balance of power in our family had shifted forever. My father wasn't the head of the table anymore. He was just another man caught in his own lies. And Thanksgiving would never belong to him again. The storm outside thrashed against the windows, wind pressing like a fist against glass. Inside, the storm had broken too. But instead of chaos, there was a strange stillness. The kind that follows a verdict. My father sat hunched in his chair, the once proud patriarch looking like a man carved smaller by truth. His fingers traced the deed lying limp on the table, as if he could rub out the ink with touch alone. No one rushed to him. No one offered comfort. That was the first sign the balance had shifted. My entire life, the family had orbited around his moods. If he was pleased, the room was light. If he was angry, everyone walked on eggshells. But tonight, his anger had been stripped bare, and no one wanted to step back into its orbit. Grandma sat straighter than I'd seen her in years. Her back no longer curled with shame. Her chin rose just enough to remind everyone that she wasn't some burden in the corner. She was the reason this family had a table to sit at. I felt her pride in the way she leaned on me, not with weight, but with trust. Michael cleared his throat. "Dad," he said softly but firmly, "you owe her an apology." The words hit the room like another thunderclap. My brother had always been quieter than me, less likely to challenge, more willing to swallow words. But tonight, he stood tall, shoulders squared. His voice didn't shake. My father glared at him, but the fire was gone. "You don't talk to me like that." "I just did," Michael replied. A ripple of whispers ran around the table. Cousins nodded. Aunt Linda folded her arms. Even Mom's eyes, nervous, always flickering toward him, held steady for once. For a moment, he looked ready to explode again. But his chest just heaved, the air rattling in and out of him. He wasn't a king anymore. He was a man without an audience. Grandma finally spoke. Her voice carried calm, but beneath it was steel. "Robert, you will not put me out of this house. Not now, not ever. That's not just my right. That's justice." His eyes darted, desperate, searching the faces around the table for backup. None came. Even Mom lowered her gaze, silent. "You've all turned against me," he muttered, almost to himself. His hand trembled as he wiped at his forehead. "My own family. I leaned forward, keeping my tone measured but firm. We didn't turn against you, Dad. You turned against us, against her, when you forgot who built this life in the first place. You tried to erase her, and tonight you failed. That's all this is. For once, he had no answer. He slumped lower, retreating inward. The dinner table slowly breathed again. Cousins began whispering to each other, some reaching over to touch Grandma's hand, murmuring words of gratitude. My brother pulled his chair closer to her, a quiet gesture that spoke louder than speeches. The food, cold and untouched, sat heavy between us, but no one seemed to care. What mattered wasn't the turkey or the pie. What mattered was that for the first time in years, truth had finally taken its seat at this table. Mom dabbed her eyes with her napkin. She didn't defend him this time. She didn't beg for quiet. Instead, she turned to Grandma and said softly, "I should have spoken sooner. I'm sorry." Grandma gave her a small, tired smile. "You were afraid. I understand fear. But fear doesn't feed a family. It doesn't build a home. Truth does." The words landed. I saw my cousins nodding, my brother blinking back tears. Even I felt my throat tighten. Later that evening, when plates were finally cleared and the storm outside calmed to a drizzle, the family gathered in the living room. The old fireplace crackled. Grandma sat in her favorite chair, a quilt draped across her knees, her hands folded like royalty. Around her, we clustered, not out of duty, but out of choice. My father stayed in the dining room alone. Through the doorway, I could see him hunched, staring at empty plates, the king of nothing. He was isolated, not by punishment, but by consequence. Michael leaned close to me. "Do you think he'll ever admit he was wrong?" I shook my head. "Maybe, maybe not. Doesn't matter anymore. Everyone here knows the truth. That's enough." Grandma glanced at me then, her eyes glistening, and for the first time in years, I saw her smile without effort. Not the practice smile she used to cover pain, but something lighter. Freed. I thought back to every late night I had spent gathering papers, every moment of doubt about whether I was doing the right thing. And in that smile, I had my answer. Vindication didn't always roar. Sometimes it was just a grandmother, sitting tall in her own home, finally seen for who she was. Dad eventually shuffled into the living room, but no one shifted to make space for him. He lingered near the doorway like a stranger in his own house. His eyes flicked to Grandma, then to me. For the first time in my life, he didn't look above me. He looked at me like an equal, and maybe even a little afraid. The silence stretched. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. With nothing left to say, he turned and walked out the front door into the rain. No one followed. And for the first time, Thanksgiving truly belonged to her. The morning after Thanksgiving felt different, like the house itself had exhaled. Light streamed through the kitchen curtains, soft and golden, spilling across the counters Grandma had scrubbed for decades. For once, it wasn't weighed down by Dad's heavy footsteps or his clipped commands. He hadn't come home after storming out into the rain. The quiet was almost holy. Grandma hummed as she stirred oatmeal on the stove. Her voice was low, quivering, but it carried. I hadn't heard her hum in years. Michael sat at the table, hair sticking up from sleep, scrolling through his phone. "He hasn't called Mom once," he muttered. "Not a word since last night." "Good," I said. "Maybe silence is the only language he'll listen to." Mom lingered near the sink, her robe tied loose. She looked smaller, diminished, yet strangely relieved. "I keep waiting for him to barge in, to act like none of it happened," she admitted. "That's what he's always done. Pretend the storm never came." I shook my head. This time, the papers don't lie. He can't erase what's in black and white. By Monday, the legal process began. I accompanied Grandma to the courthouse, its limestone walls stained by decades of weather. She clutched her purse close, her steps slow but sure. People stared, some in recognition, some in curiosity. Maybe they'd heard already. News like ours traveled fast in small towns. Inside, the clerk stamped the documents I'd prepared weeks ago, certified copies of the deed, affidavits, notarized statements. Each thunk of the stamp felt like another nail driven into the coffin of Dad's control. The clerk slid the last paper back across the counter. "This house is half yours," she said simply. "Always has been." Grandma's eyes watered. "I knew," she whispered. "But seeing it here?" She pressed a trembling hand against the paper, as if grounding herself in the ink. I slipped an arm around her shoulders. "Now everyone knows." Meanwhile, Dad unraveled. We heard it in fragments, whispers from neighbors, half conversations overheard in town. He'd stormed into his lawyer's office demanding they challenge the documents, only to be told there was no loophole. The agreement was ironclad. He tried rallying friends at the bar, but even there, people shook their heads. "You tried to throw your own mother out?" they asked. He walked out red-faced, humiliated. By the end of the week, he was living in a rented apartment across town, alone. At home, the shift was profound. Grandma reclaimed her seat at the head of the table, not by force, but by the quiet respect that flowed toward her. Relatives visited, not out of obligation to Dad, but out of love for her. They brought pies, flowers, hugs. Aunt Linda joked, "We should have staged this trial years ago." Even Mom softened. I caught her one evening, sitting with Grandma in the living room, their hands entwined. "I should have defended you," Mom whispered. "All those years. I let him dictate everything." Grandma smiled gently. "Fear is heavy, but it's never too late to set it down." Michael and I began helping Grandma sort through old files. She showed us shoeboxes of receipts, letters, photos. Each piece was a thread in the fabric she had woven for decades, the evidence of a life spent holding others up. We filed them neatly, building a record that could never again be ignored or erased. As we worked, she leaned close to me. "Child," she said softly, "what you did, standing up at that table, that was more than justice. That was love." Her words sank deep. Justice was my duty as a cop. But love, that was something larger, something heavier, something worth every risk. A week later, Dad appeared on the porch. Rain slicked his hair. He looked older, diminished. He didn't cross the threshold. "I came for my things," he said flatly. Michael stood behind me, arms crossed. "They're boxed in the garage. Take them and go." Dad's eyes darted past me toward the kitchen, where Grandma sat at the table sipping tea. For once, he didn't bark or boast. He just stared at her, like a man facing a mountain he couldn't climb. His lips moved, but no sound came. Finally, he turned, took his boxes, and left. The door shut. His shadow didn't linger. That night, we gathered again in the living room, fire crackling, cousins filling every corner. Grandma sat in her chair, quilt across her lap, laughter softening the room. The fear was gone. The silence was gone. Michael raised a glass. "To Grandma," he said, "the backbone of this family. May we never forget again." Glasses clinked. Grandma chuckled, shaking her head. "Backbone," she teased. "I thought I was just an old lady with a wooden spoon." But her smile betrayed pride, the kind that comes from finally being seen. As the flames popped and sparks floated upward, I realized the war wasn't just about property. It was about truth, about anchoring a family to the person who had kept it afloat all along. Dad had lost more than a house. He had lost the power of his narrative, and that was a loss he could never repair. Snow came early that year, dusting the roof of the house like powdered sugar. From the porch, I watched the flakes drift under the yellow glow of the streetlight, soft and silent, covering the yard where we'd once raked leaves together. Grandma stood beside me, wrapped in her thick cardigan, steam curling from her teacup. She looked peaceful, her shoulders no longer hunched, her eyes bright even in the winter night. Inside, the family laughed around the fireplace. Michael strummed his guitar while cousins sang off-key. The house was alive, buzzing with warmth. And for the first time in decades, the laughter wasn't strained or cautious. It was free. Funny, Grandma said, her voice carrying the scratch of age but the strength of steel. I thought I'd die before anyone remembered what I did for this family. You're not dying, I said quickly. Not anytime soon. You've got years left to remind us. She chuckled, the sound soft but steady. It feels good, though, to be seen before it's too late, to know my story didn't vanish under someone else's shadow. I slipped an arm around her. Your story is the foundation. The rest of us are just building on it. She tilted her head, studying me. And you? Her hand squeezed mine. You gave me my voice back. Word of what happened at Thanksgiving spread through town. Neighbors dropped by, bringing pies and casseroles, some out of sympathy, others out of curiosity. Each one asked the same thing. Did he really try to throw her out? Yes, I'd answer simply. And no, he didn't succeed. It wasn't about gossip. It was about reputation. The same man who once walked into diners shaking hands, boasting about his success, was now whispered about with pity and scorn. He had built his pride on control. Now, he was left with silence and an apartment that smelled of old paint. Justice hadn't come from a judge's gavel. It had come from a dinner table, from paper spread across mashed potatoes and gravy, from a family finally choosing truth over fear. Weeks later, we hosted Christmas in the same house. Grandma sat at the head of the table, her quilt draped over her legs, her smile as steady as the tree lights blinking in the corner. Before we ate, Michael raised his glass again. To Grandma, he said, voice firm and full of pride. The heart and the history of this family. May we never forget again. Everyone clinked glasses, the sound ringing like bells. I looked across the table, at the faces glowing in candlelight, and felt something deep and quiet settle inside me. Satisfaction. Not the shallow kind that comes from winning an argument. The kind that comes from knowing justice had been restored, dignity returned, balance made whole. Later that night, after the dishes were cleared and the house quieted, I tucked Grandma into bed. She reached for my hand before I could leave. Child, she whispered, I don't need riches. I don't need praise. What you gave me was more precious. You gave me back my home. Her words lodged in my heart. My badge had taught me about laws, but this was about legacy, about standing up when silence was easier, about making sure the people who held us up aren't forgotten when they falter. As I closed her door, I thought back to Thanksgiving night, to the moment my father opened that envelope and screamed. That sound haunted me, not because it scared me, but because it was the sound of power breaking, of lies cracking, of truth forcing its way out. Sometimes justice doesn't roar in a courtroom. Sometimes